Hey guys, Chris here from Work to Game, Gaming Kinda, and now Gaming Kinda TV over on Facebook as well. That means that if you are watching this, it is October 13th or later, so I can finally share everything we learned from the media tour, but I do have a couple of disclaimers. First of all, Yoshi P opened his statement to us by saying a thank you to the medical staff over the last few years, and I would like to echo his thoughts. You've been asked of a lot in the fight over the last few years, and if 14 can help be a way to connect with friends or relax after a long day, then I am happy that I can share what we now know about Endwalker coming up very soon, and the devs hope that in some small way that can be a thank you and a place for you to enjoy and appreciate all that you do. Second, a disclaimer about the content itself. We were given brief access to a development build of Endwalker. Any footage I used from this time is development footage and will be labeled as such. Any of this is subject to change, any tooltips, any potencies, anything I show as they put the finishing touches on Endwalker may be subject to adjustments. Now, when I look at the things that affect all of the tanks, during the Job Action Live Letter, a statement was made that defensives used at optimal times by main tanks and even off tanks would benefit the tank. I didn't see this directly in the content that we were allowed to try at the media tour, but it could possibly refer to a change in how mitigation is used in encounters by making mitigation windows more meaningful or just making things hit harder. We didn't get a chance to do a lot of level 90 content, and so we'll have to see what that means. This statement still rings around in my head the way it was stated. Do jobs, just the way their changes in mitigation work? We've seen changes to things in the past, and I hadn't heard a statement quite like this for past expansions. So either I'm misremembering the way they've always presented these changes in the past, or I'm just not understanding quite yet what this means in how this is drastically different than any other time we've added or changed defensives moving into an expansion. The second statement was that ranged abilities no longer break combos for tanks or melee jobs. This is massive. Having tried every single job during the media tour, I can tell you that if I broke a combo, I now knew for a fact it was my fault. This gives me the ability to aim to improve at a pace that is entirely my own, and without the added layer of wondering, did the encounter make me mess up? Was there something weird about an ability that was called for breaking a combo? Trying to keep my uptime up with these ranged combos as I move out, I now get to make my own choices on what skills I prioritize within certain burst windows, and everything I do as far as completing combos, whether or not I am using a ranged attack, uptime is something I can now maintain while also trying to complete combos, which is something this expansion seems to be heavily leaning into across a number of jobs. This is a factor that has bugged me throughout Shadowbringers as I've aimed to improve as a player, and I think this is a wonderful change moving forward. Next, there was a statement that the parity between physical and magical attributes was different, and it was a carryover from the A Realm Reborn development, and that has now been fixed and will mean that physical abilities potencies would need to be lowered if the ability was to be doing the same damage relative to Shadowbringers. So behind the scenes coefficients, these things that we weren't really seeing outright represented in the UI cleanly and openly like potency is in a tooltip, will make it easier moving forward. But keep in mind that as we see potency adjustments, this is different than the stat squish, as we see potency adjustments, an increase in its strength might mean that the potency stays the same or goes up, and a decrease in an ability's strength, something for it to be nerfed, would need to be lowered even beyond what this is calling for. So as we compare potencies, when we talk about the fact that layered on top of this we have an attribute stat squish, everything's going to work just a little bit differently moving forward. The biggest thing that I can say we can take away from everything we can see right now, besides nerf and buff, is how do abilities compare to each other? Are there abilities that went up while other abilities went down within the same class? And does this help us understand where the importance of a combo action matters versus does the ability get as penalized when it's not used as a combo action? And that'll give us more of their mindset moving forward. And then, of course, as we see, theory crafters get into actual rotations, that will help us understand what this means as far as the way we play. And all of that will be useful when we get into the context of the game itself this November. Now, the stat squish is something independent of this, so any damage, any flyover text you see in any videos anywhere, that is, of course, going on. So remember that that's just going to feel different. I actually didn't feel any... I don't really feel the stat squish is something that felt any different than what I would say at Media Tour footage going into Shadowbringers, which was not filled with a stat squish. The potencies that are all shown are still subject to potential adjustments, so we are looking at the overall mentalities of what we learned, knowing that there might be still a few moving parts as they get down to the wire with what they can still change. I don't remember them stating exactly when the build date of our Media Tour build is from, but obviously from when that build was finalized to prep it for us to the build that releases on November 19th for early access to Endwalker, that will be a window that they could still change things. And lastly, looking at all of the tanks, let's look at role actions. When looking at the 4 tanks, while many abilities such as tank stance, ranged actions, gap closers, and even to some degree things like invulns can be similar, these 7 actions are literally shared. They're identical in every single way across the role and have not changed at all moving into Endwalker. Rampart, still a defensive. It's a flat 20% mitigation for 20 seconds. I felt a little softer in the one dungeon they let us try, but that could be that I was playing on a character without my proper keybind, so I was a little bit off. It could be that our healer, who was trying and adjusting incredibly well, was playing on Sage, so her total playtime adjusting to that class could not have been that much. Considering she is a healer that can clear E12, she still only had the job for a couple minutes, basically, before we went into the dungeon. A lack of familiarity with the encounters and anything that's going to work a little bit different in the way the encounters are designed. This is also only slightly insightful because the dungeon was not level 90 content, much less things like raids, trials, or even crazier savage, so it'll be hard to show if mitigation will feel worse or better this time around until we get into actual content. Low blow is still a 5-second stun. I would love to see this used more in encounters. That's not something we can know until we see the content of Endwalker. I just personally think that things like dungeons, which we did get to see one dungeon as well as some open world content, that's a sliver of what Endwalker could offer, and I would love to see this used more as we get into raids, alliance raids, definitely dungeons. Provoke, enmity, threat, hate. Shadowbringers turn this on its head with the shift to tank stance, and that does not appear to have been a big focus of what we are seeing moving into Endwalker. We're largely going to see that the same as Shadowbringers. It's the same 30-second cooldown, so if anything feels different as far as your ability to shift between main tank and off tank, especially as we talk about tank swaps where you're trying to rotate which tank is in charge, that's all going to likely feel different from the rotation side of things, which some jobs rotations this expansion changed a lot more than others. Interject, like low blow, I honestly just hope it gets used more. I think interrupts are not nearly used as often in this game as I would like them to be. I think they're something that adds an unpredictable additional task you need to do in your rotation, especially in content like dungeons, which don't have a harder mode available. Casual beginner players would just get hit by it. No big deal. They just have to pull slower because they're getting hit by extra stuff. Players that are willing to optimize that a little bit have one additional thing that they can practice doing. Knowing that dungeons are also something that we regularly outgear, we regularly don't need the gear from, and we're running them for roulettes to get tomes, this would be something that I think would add a lot of variety to dungeons. Just stuns, interrupts, things like that would be more intriguing in my mind. I don't see anything here saying that interject is going to be used any differently than it is now. Now, reprisal has not been changed at all, but is honestly just a god-tier ability. So if this is your first time hearing of reprisal, please use it, starting now. It doesn't matter if it's still Shadowbringers, use it. Endwalker tanks will be able to pull faster. Our ranged abilities, my warrior ranged ability got further. Gap closers on everybody but warrior went up to match warrior's 20-yard range, as well as almost all of the other jobs are getting something to help with movement. So we could very easily see tanks moving into double or triple pulls restricted only by the walls that dungeons put up. And this, when you get a big AoE pull in, reduces all nearby enemies by 10%. So it's just a flat reduction in damage. And you pair that with arm's length. It hasn't changed as well, but it is also an incredible thing for AoE pulling. It is likely the most understood ability in this section for new tanks or players coming over from another game who are simply misreading the terminology. In raids, this is usually used for anti-knockback, so I think we have that pretty well in hand as a community. It, however, works very similar to reprisal in dungeons when you pull big. It adds slow to enemies. In 14, the ability to reduce somebody's speed from movement is called heavy. Heavy gets placed on you, heavy gets placed on a mob, whatever. Heavy is what adjusts the movement speed. But if you are looking at swing speed, this is what slow means. And so when you have a lot of guys swinging at you repeatedly, this slows down how often they swing, which is going to reduce the number of times you're getting hit per second in these big pulls. So that's arm's length is still an incredible thing to use in dungeons. It's just you're not using it typically for the anti-knockback. You'd be using it for this ability to slow down how often a bunch of little guys hit you. Lastly, Shirk. Didn't change. I've never really needed this ability outside of Savage or Extreme. So unless the tanks are having to swap back and forth who's main tank in a tank swap mechanic, it's not an ability that I see typically used very much. It doesn't seem it's changed. So until we can get Savage, we won't really know how it feels switching threat versus this expansion. Obviously, everybody's learned to manage to clear all the content just fine. And that's the role actions. So nothing crazy for how this is going to impact any one of the tanks, much less all of the tanks. But I don't worry for individual tank changes being something that's going to feel like you don't know how to play your tank. We don't yet know everything that's going to feel different from playing Shadowbringers at level 80 versus Endwalker at 90. But as a general rule, I think when we look at the tanks as a whole, I don't see anything here in the broad category of tanks that's going to drastically change the way you play. It's mostly going to be in the individual changes that change your rotation, where you feel that your identity shifts any at all per tank. So with role actions out of the way, let's talk about Paladin. I'm going to break this into a couple of sections. What did not change, what got weaker, and then what changed in a way where it either got stronger or stayed the same. So let's go ahead and start with what did not change, and then at the very end we're going to talk about what's new. And I think this is the job that cosmetically in the job action trailer you could immediately tell was drastically different. When they talked about Warrior, we knew it changed, and I know it changed a lot, but Paladin is the one that everybody knew, whoa, what is that? So the first thing I want to talk about in this section is that there is a trait at level 84 increasing some base potencies, and I don't have mouse over the tooltips beforehand, so I am comparing level 80 jobs to 90 jobs. So anybody that's looking at these numbers and saying, let's start using these as placeholders for what's going to happen to synced content, things like ultimates, these tooltips, assuming these numbers don't change, are still only helpful beyond level 84. Fast Blade stayed the exact same. This has been the trend on non-combo abilities across tanks. The non-combo abilities staying the same is a big deal because we expect physical abilities to go down to remain at the same strength because they change the way they're calculated on the back end. So that ends up being a buff on any physical ability that stays the same. Fight or Flight, Sentinel, Passage of Arms, all did not change. Mitigation is one that has been really hard to tell. Is it going to feel different? We didn't get a glimpse at that much level 90 content. So that'll be something that we need to see trials, we need to see raids, we need to see alliance raids, we need to see savages to know how mitigation really feels. Sheltron stayed the exact same, but we're going to get something new in the new section at level 82 that's going to replace it. Cover just didn't change. Hallowed Ground did not change, but do note that all tank vulns are now 10 seconds. And so by comparison, it is going to be something that invulns are going to feel a little different. We're going to see how encounters respond to that. Enmity across the board just didn't really change. Enmity is something that we expect. I mean, tank stances stay the same. Enmity feels the same, but the rotations are going to be what changed. Now, what got weaker? Total Eclipse dropped from 120 to 100, but Paladin received a fair bit of changes. So on this own, this could be a win. It's hard to say. Remember that physical skills are the things that got hit harder than magical. So with this job, just keep that in mind because it is a job that kind of balances that line. Prominence stayed the same base, but with the combo portion, it went down from 220 to 170, making the two-part combo now just 270 instead of 360, which is a big drop. So we'll keep in mind with the new stuff being added, but this is something we're going to see where the difference between non-combo and combo actions is going to get narrower, but then there's going to be more things to reward you for doing your combo action beyond just raw potency, which I think will make it easier to tell when you're doing your job well, as opposed to needing something like an Abacus to tell you how well you're doing. It's like, no, how many times are you getting to cast these big ultimate abilities? Are you seeing, the biggest, baddest sword from the job action trailer on your Paladin the same number of times per fight that I am? Rather than are you counting up your potency as you cast your abilities. Shield Dash dropped from 100 to 110. It's just under 10% now. Iron Will with the enmity, like, this didn't change. Slid this into this section in my notes for some reason, but I will say that rotations are just going to feel different on tanks across the board. Circle of Scorn, both the base damage dropped from 120 to 100, and the dot from 35 to 25. Goring Blade kept the same base damage, but the combo dropped from 390 to 250, and the dot damage dropped from 85 to 65. But note that the Blade of Valor and our big sword finisher is something we're going to talk about at the end here. So just keep in mind, there's a lot of potency still to be added to this job. Clemency took a hit from 1200 to 1000, but we do have other healing elsewhere now. Lots of self-healing on this job. Atonement went from 550 to 420, but once again, it's not the be-all, end-all, so it is a big drop, but it's okay. Confiteor took a massive hit from 850 down to 400. But I am noting all these big hits to get the bad news out of the way, but wait for the news section. It comes back, I promise. What changed? Now I'm going to go roughly in order of what level things unlock and then keep upgraded versions together, but we have a lot to go over here. This is the biggest section. Before I do this, I do want to remind you there is a trait at level 84 that's affecting some potencies, so just note that I am comparing the level 90 potencies versus Shadowbringer's level 80 potencies to the best of my ability. Riot Blade. As with the other tanks, the non-combo went up here, but it went up by a lot, and then the combo potency stayed the same. So Riot Blade felt like it went up a whole lot, up to 170. So if we finish the combo with Rage of Halone, the base damage stays the same, but the combo action went from 350 down to 330, which is just around a 5% drop in the total combo. And we would be 850 potency down to 830. So it's pretty minor across the board when we look at total combo. 850 down to 830 is not that big of a deal, especially considering we expected physical to take a hit in what the tooltip reflects. Shield Lob took a small hit from 120 down to 100, no longer breaks combos, has an extra 5 yalms of range. I think the ranged ability on tanks has been a big winner across the board. It'll make you feel like you can truly use all your globals when there is a target to hit. Spirits Within just works different now. It used to be anywhere between 100 and 370 potency based on your percentage health at the time you cast it. It's now a flat 250. Divine Veil is going to gain a 400 potency heal starting at level 88, so keep that in mind, you T-runners. Intervention, extended duration by 2 seconds, cut down its effectiveness from 50% to 10% when you're syncing it with Rampart or Sentinel, so it'll feel less bound to use those at the same time. It now has a new effect that's going to kick in that'll give you 4 seconds of additional mitigation and a hot that ticks over 12 seconds. This is all a massive change. A lot of these changes are based around a level 82 trait. I've been calling this Trait Walker. There's a ton of traits. So keep in mind that these traits are going to tell you, do these tooltips, are they always this beefy, or is that something that they're going to feel the way they always felt in synced content, and they're just going to get a lot beefier as we go into Endwalker? Holy Spirit dropped from 350 down to 270, but it gained a self-heal starting at level 84. This is interesting in context with the changes to your magical side of your rotation. Holy Circle is the exact same, but for AoE, and it dropped from 250 down to 150 and gained an identical heal. Now, speaking of magical Requiescat, is obviously the thing that we want to talk about. It used to be 150 to 550 damage based potency based on the percentage of MP, but now it's going to just be a flat 400. It also used to give you 12 seconds to manage your holy and then get your Confiteor in. Now it's going to be 30 seconds, and then you're going to just get stacks, and nowhere in it does it care about your MP at all. Intervene went from 200 down to 150, but now has a 20 yalm range. These becoming weaker, but having further, I think will encourage you to use them more like a gap closer and not just extra damage from up close. So I think these will be nice changes, especially for dungeons. So with that, that's not that big of a list of what got hit compared to some other jobs. Let's talk about, I mean, that's some big changes, but let's talk about what's new. First of all, Holy Sheltron is our new Sheltron. It looks good. Like it, love it, use it. Expasion is our new AoE instant. It hits decent. Keep in mind that we lost a fair bit of potency as we went through AoEs earlier, so this should be some of what offsets that. And then Blade of Faith, Blade of Truth, Blade of Valor are those series of swords dropping down from the job action trailer. Those now upgrade your Confiteor into a big long combo, like a PvP combo. So it's going to feel like the inner release of slamming Fellcleave as a warrior. You saw it. You now have tooltips for it. It's easy to do. Just enjoy the show and make sure you stay all the way through to that final sword, Blade of Valor. That's incredibly important because it has that AoE dot on it. Across the board, I think Paladin was a big winner. I think it's the job that, in my opinion, I always felt like it was the hardest to just like jump onto from one of the other tanks and just immediately feel comfortable. It always felt like it had a very tightly tuned rotation, and that I didn't necessarily know if I was doing it right. And I think being able to get to the Blade of Valor section, have it cosmetically tell me I'm doing it right, being able to have more self-heal come in throughout the board, I think Paladins are going to be something that could very well be a progression tank. I'm not the rotation guy. I don't play at that level, but based on just my initial feeling here, like it will feel pretty cozy to be on something that has this amount of mitigation on it. It feels like it very naturally wants to be healing you, wants to be healing party members, wants to be just the sword and board tank. I am interested to see how it feels as it levels up, like how it plays in synced content, because just enough of this changed that I'm wondering how it'll feel synced. Gunbreaker is a job, for example, that I think I really don't like it that much in synced content because it feels so different than it does at level 80. And I'm looking forward to seeing kind of how Paladin plays as it goes, because this is a fair bit of changes, and so I want to see, does it feel like you're encouraging this level of like self-sustain and all that as you go? Does the magical to physical combo feel really good when you strip out parts of it, or does it have to all be there to feel like a big healthy combo? Because it is the most complex combo, in my opinion, to wrap your head around. Gunbreakers is very long, but it's very linear. Paladin, there's this physical side, and then there's this magical side. Dark Knight is about kind of managing and keeping things being used. So as long as you're using your mana, as long as you're using things, you're probably pretty close, and it's just about using the right things in the right order. Warrior is very, very, very straightforward. So Paladin has always, in my opinion, been the hardest tank to get right, and I think that a lot of these changes will help it feel a lot better. And so hopefully it'll feel more like a tank that I'm just as excited to play as the other tanks. I'm excited to see what the end game people do with it. I'm excited to see, maybe if Ren or somebody else can get some of these Paladin guides up, somebody like Mistech. There's plenty of Paladin mains out there. And so I'm excited to see that. And let's get into Endwalker.